Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Tyler.
Jesse.
And I'm Eli.
And welcome to our first postseason episode of 2022. And unfortunately, our Baltimore Orioles are not playing baseball any longer. Not to our surprise, though. I think we all said on our most recent episode that they were not going to make the postseason. But are anybody surprised by that outcome, Jesse?
No, I mean, I think if anything else, we've been consistent all year saying the Orioles weren't going to make the postseason. Before the season, we all agreed the Orioles weren't going to make the postseason. Midway through, even after we won, I think we all still agreed that the Orioles probably were not going to make the postseason. And as you said on our last episode, I think we all agreed that, again, we weren't going to make the postseason. So.
Yeah. So, basically this is like the look back episode, and based on what Jesse just said, we were pretty much right on all of our predictions. So we can just wrap it up here.
Yeah. Every single one.
Thank you so much for listening.
Right.
But yeah, it still was disappointing though, I think. And I feel like if you're on Twitter, which I know, Eli, you were manning the ship over there, but you could feel the vibes in Orioles Twitter that everybody was getting a little agitated because it wasn't that the Orioles were playing horrifically bad in September and early October, but they were kind of just playing mediocre baseball, right, and they needed to be really good. So I don't know, Eli, were you kind of disappointed with the play the last 4 weeks or so of the season?
Yeah, I'm not sure I was so disappointed with the play per se. It seemed like I don't know. It seemed like that was what this team was in my eyes. People talk about the Hall of Fame versus Hall of Very Good. We were not a postseason team. We were a good team this year. And so, getting into these critical moments and just kind of falling short, like you look at those couple series against the Blue Jays in September as pretty decisive critical moments in our season. And we definitely faltered in them. There's no other way to cut it. And that's okay. It's just this team was fine this year. I was just preparing for the episode, taking a look through, by a measure of weighted runs created plus, we were the 17th best team in the league. So like overall our offensive production was below average. We did a lot of things better on the pitching side of the ball that brought us back to a good side, brought us back above league average, I think, as a team as a whole. But there are improvements to be made. And yeah, I don't think this was a playoff team this year.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of how the front office sort of treated the team coming into the season. And then even at the trade deadline, they weren't really buying it. And you can always go and say, well, if they had bought at the deadline, maybe we would have been a couple games better. But I don't know. It's tough to say, like, yeah, if we had this player here and this player and keep Jorge Lopez and Trey Mancini, this team wins 90 games. Like, that doesn't really pass the sniff test for me. Not that they needed 90, they needed 87.
Right.
But yeah, it felt about right. Jess, did you want to hop in?
That's definitely a stretch. I think, of course, one thing you could point to, of course, is John Means going down at the beginning of the year. I obviously think that would have made a big difference, especially down the stretch with the starting pitching starting, to unravel a little bit. So, that's one thing I think about. But, what's kind of disappointing sort of at the end is despite the great individual performances of someone like Gunnar Henderson, the Orioles didn't, as a whole, really turn it up, playing in September, even after he had come up. DL Hall didn't really, I feel like, was kind of sort of a non-factor, in the whole thing when looking back on it. And so
he started to improve down the stretch, but he had a couple rough outings. Yeah,
definitely. And then he was relegated to the bullpen, right? He wasn't starting.
Right.
Well, that was the plan all along, but
yeah. Right. He had a few spot starts for us. So
just one.
Yeah.
Or the one
and
against
that was the plan all along. Yeah. Right. He pitched against the Rays and it was going to the pen.
Yeah. So the fact that despite how good Henderson was, it didn't really impact the Orioles win-loss wise tremendously. And the Orioles still like faltered in September. September was probably a worse month than most of the previous months for them. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was like, I can look it up. I had it up just a second ago, but now of course I don't. But I think it was basically like a mediocre month, right? Like they weren't great as they needed to be. And I've actually got it now. They went 13-15 in September and 2-3 in October. So combined for 15-18, which they needed to be 5 games over 500, and they were 3 games under. So and the only team that really started to struggle along with them in the playoff race was the Mariners. Kind of started to go a little flat at the end, but the Mariners also had the advantage of beating the Orioles head to head earlier in the season. So they kind of had even an extra game on them in that sense. So yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the outcome is sort of reflective of who the Orioles were, which is a team that is way better than it was a year ago, but not quite to the point they needed to be. One thing that didn't happen in September, October, that I think we've talked about that could have happened was a promotion for Grayson Rodriguez. It didn't happen, and I'm not sure exactly why. The Orioles did build him back up in the minors. He threw a couple of 5-inning starts, I think, at the very end, but just didn't get the call. And I think Mike Elias had a quote that said something along the lines of, I hope he'll be in the mix for the rotation to start next year in the big leagues. Eli, what do you think about Rodriguez not getting the call this year?
Yeah, I just didn't really get it. You know, particularly we had an opening on the last day of the season that, you know, there was some question, and it's just kind of like, at this point, your season's over, you know, and Grayson can just kind of be a message that says like, hey, we're coming next year, you know, something as simple as that. And yeah, like you said, he'd been built up to 5 innings. He was, you know, he had given up some runs in the couple starts since he came back, but he was striking guys out. You know, the stuff didn't look bad. And yeah, I think you throw him out there. What the heck? I didn't really understand it. But at the same time, you know, these Orioles and this front office have been notoriously conservative with their prospects. So I can't exactly say I'm surprised.
Fair enough. Yeah, just real quick, Jess, before I get your kind of thoughts there is Rodriguez had made 3 starts with the Tides in September, throwing 72 pitches on the 16th, 83 pitches on the 21st, and 90 pitches on the 26th. Those 90 pitches were the most he threw in any single outing all year long. So if we think that back in late May, early June, he was ready to come up having not thrown 90 pitches yet, you have to think he was ready then. But Jess, do you have any thoughts as to why the Orioles maybe just didn't bring him up?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm that critical of it. Right after I mean, I think largely the Orioles were out of it, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, if the Orioles had been in contention at that point and needed a win or something, I think it might have played out differently. They would have, you know, used him as the second secret weapon, you know, the Orioles have, most likely. After Hall, I'm referring to. But yeah, I mean, at that point it wasn't necessary. I don't mind him not coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't change like the Orioles' destiny for 2022, but the Orioles have made sort of a habit of giving their guys a taste of the next level the previous year. They did it with Henderson last year, where he kind of struggled at Norfolk last year? He struggled whatever level he was at a little bit at the very end of last year, and then obviously this year kind of started the year hot and just didn't really stop. So I'm definitely a little bit disappointed. I would have liked to have seen him make a start instead of Spencer Watkins or I don't know, anybody else.
Mike Baumann.
Baumann,
Baumann probably. Voth, I maybe could have been like, okay, Voth, you're good for the year, but didn't happen. Maybe they saw something in velocity, or he maybe said he felt something and they don't want to push him. I don't know. But yeah, I see no reason why he won't be in the starting rotation next year, which that'll be an interesting discussion. we'll have in the offseason about who the Orioles opening day starter is, because I don't think it's very clear at the moment with John Means on the shelf. So, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if we're good talking about September and October, do we want to maybe just look back at the entire season? And we can talk about, I guess, first sort of what went right for the Orioles. What was like maybe a reason or two, Eli, that you think the Orioles were able to do what they did and have that 30+ win turnaround had it not happened?
Yeah, put very simply, it was the pitching. It was the pitching for me. I saw it was Rob Daniels on Twitter. He threw up a tweet that the Orioles only scored 5 more runs this year than they did last year, but the number of runs that they gave up was over 200 less. So this Orioles team, by xFIP, we were the 11th best team. And that was just kind of a whole new experience for us. And it was fascinating to see the way that, we got all these guys. Jordan Lyles had never been a high upside pitcher, but he actually, was a pretty legitimate third man in the rotation. Of course, he was first for us, but as opposed to the 4 or 5 that you signed him as a free agent. Austin Voth, we picked off waivers and immediately turned him into a pretty effective starter. Dean Kramer, we all thought he was lost besides Jesse. And, he was wildly effective this year. Bradish, it was good to see him mature a bit. But, as the season went on, the rotation actually seemed to get even stronger and even stronger. And that just bodes really well for me heading into next year.
Yeah, that is I've said before that the starting pitching in particular went from being absolutely dreadful in 2021 to being mediocre, maybe slightly below average technically, but that is it was such a huge jump from where they were. And obviously the bullpen was great, but Jess, do you want to give maybe what you think went right for this team?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to agree with Eli. Obviously, I think the starting pitching was the biggest role in the change. Of course, the outstanding bullpen, of course, too, can't not be mentioned. So they're both of those things. I think also the starting pitching is pretty remarkable in the context of how little effort management put into constructing the starting rotation, right? Yeah. I mean, Jordan Lyles was the big signing for the Orioles in the offseason, and the fact that it saw the turnaround that it did, with Voth as the waiver claim, right? And then all these, Lyles stepping up in a big way, and then Spencer Watkins having a turnaround season. Obviously he was still shaky at moments, but so I mean, with despite Elias putting so little effort into making this a good rotation, it actually turned out to be semi-decent. So.
Yeah, that's totally valid. I think I'll just go a little bit. I mean, obviously the pitching was much better this season. We talked about that. And although, as Eli rightly put it out, the offense wasn't really in any way, shape, or form better than a season ago.
5 runs better.
Well, I mean, is that a statistical significant amount of runs? I don't know. But obviously there were some injections of talent there. And also it seemed like on the offensive side of things, the Orioles had some good luck with injuries this year. There weren't really any of those extended. All the bad luck was on the pitching side with Means going down, and Chris Ellis got hurt, and Alex Wells had his issues. Tyler Wells had his issues. But Brandon Hyde was able to deploy his guys most of the time. Austin Hayes didn't have to go on the IL, although maybe that was a mistake. He maybe should have gone on the IL for a little bit because he struggled in August a little bit. Cedric Mullins played every day. Anthony Santander, another guy that's had injury issues, he was able to play. Some of that was probably because he DH'd about half the time. And then obviously the roster in general was a little bit younger, which probably helps with injuries too. Rutschman was able to catch every day. Taron Vavra got in there a little bit, Gunnar Henderson. I think, in addition to the pitching, injury luck on the offensive side helped to maybe sustain a similar level of offense as they had a season ago, which they needed every bit of it because, and I'll talk about this when we touch on Brandon Hyde here in a minute, but run differential this year, actually the Orioles got outscored this year, which is usually doesn't lead to a winning record, but they needed every run that they got to get to the 83 wins. All right, Jess, I'll go back to you to maybe talk about what went wrong for the Orioles, though. What maybe prevented them from being even better than an 83 win team and potentially going to the postseason?
Well, it kind of is actually the same answer. The starting pitching, despite its massive improvement, in the end, it just wasn't good enough. So I mean, the starting pitching, what's frustrating about it is if some effort had been put into it and hadn't been cobbled together so much, I think we could have actually constructed a decent starting staff. But I mean, especially at the end of the year when we have Zimmerman and Ballman making these starts for, in these must-win games for the O's, I mean, it's just not sufficient. So, and then also, right, the offense, we've talked about it kind of all year. I mean, I think you say it best, Tyler, that it's definitely not a complete offense. It's not well-rounded. It's not constructed in a great way. And there was a lot of variability in the lineup every day. Guys were shuffling around, even moving positions defensively too much. Which had offensive ramifications. The fact that there wasn't a set lineup, it really got exposed, throughout the course of the year. We would go into these slumps where just, we really wouldn't score for extended, periods of time. So, so I think it's basically those two things. Of course, we have an all-star bullpen. So you can't at all complain about that. But the bullpen was definitely a World Series competent bullpen. In terms of the starting pitching and the offense, both of those, of course, didn't allow us to be playoff contenders. So.
Yeah, two pretty big elements.
Right.
The hitting and the pitching.
Right, exactly. I mean, the defense wasn't great either, but
well,
I mean, we had some good positions that were great.
That's another element where they went from awful to competent, and that feels a whole lot different to watch that. Eli, what do you think that went wrong for the Orioles?
Yeah, I have to look at the offense. Again, I think we were all relatively pleased with it because I don't know, because we had watched 2018 through 2020. But I don't know. I guess Rougned Odor is the first thing to look at. On the year, our second baseman ranked 26th in the league with a 76 WRC plus. Our third basemen were 21st in the league. Our shortstops were 26th in the league. And, so I guess I look at that and only one of the four positions on our infield day in, day out was an above average offensive player. And that definitely is not a recipe for sustained success. I think that Jorge Mateo probably provides positive value, like we've talked about, because his defense is so good. But, that only works as a recipe when he is supplemented by some people who can really bang on either side of him. And that just wasn't the case this year. We saw things change a bit in September when Gunnar came up. And that looked like a much more well-rounded infield, so to speak. But by that time, then we were losing production from Hayes, like we talked about. Odor was still a black hole in the lineup. Aguilar was being rotated in. And so there were other detractors kind of at the same time as Gunnar was coming in. I think we need to really look into a way to add an impact bat over the course of this year, somebody to really stabilize the heart of the lineup. to go along with Rutschman, Santander, and Henderson.
Eli's calling for the Orioles to sign Aaron Judge this offseason. So
why not?
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of people talk about that on Twitter, and I have to say, like, I do not think there's any way that happens. No. You know, if I am Aaron Judge, well, like him particularly, if I'm Aaron Judge and my greatest skill set is the 62 home runs that I just knocked, I'm not going to a place that's taken away a bunch of them. Like, you know, he could go down in history as a home run hitter.
Well,
and he's got this prolific production as that. It doesn't make any sense, but that tells me that we could sign a pitcher.
Well,
for the exact same reason.
I would say your reasoning for why Aaron Judge wouldn't want to sign here is the same reasoning why the Orioles wouldn't want to sign Aaron Judge. Like, not that he wouldn't be productive still in some way, but they're clearly constructing this team to benefit left-handed hitting players, and they're drafting that way. So, like, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to then give the money that essentially is they're going to give Rutschman or Henderson. One of them is going to get a big deal,
I think,
in the next year. Now it's not going to be Aaron Judge level,
okay, yeah. But that's a big difference. I mean, they could go for 120. Judge might be a $400 million.
But there's only so many. There's only so much money to go around. Like, and you know, I'm always one that says, like, it's not my money. I don't care. Spend as much as you possibly can to put a good team on the field. I don't care. But at the same time, we all understand that the Orioles are only going to spend so much money on the roster. So if we know they only have so much money, we don't know what that figure is. Probably around $120 million. I could see the Orioles going to a year. You know, only so much of that can go around. If Aaron Judge is getting 30 million of it, I don't see them spending a whole lot. And also, you're buying the later years in his career, which I'm happy to have the Yankees do that. He's really good. He'll be really productive there. I just don't see it as a fit for the Orioles now or in the future. But it's fun to dream about it for a couple months.
Makes sense, yeah.
My dream is we trade for Shohei.
That would be incredible. That's why
I'm still dreaming about it.
There was something where Joey Ortiz is now like a top 100 prospect, and I was like, oh, at Angels, did you see this? Like, this is crazy. You guys need a shortstop. We need an ace pitcher
and a monster hitter.
Oh,
right. Yeah. Well, it just works out perfectly. You know, it's like this stadium was built for him.
Oh, it'd be great. It'd be great. And I could reason with giving him the money a little bit more. It still feels like not an Orioles move, but
no.
It would make 2023 really fun for sure.
I don't actually think it will happen, for the record, but it'd be pretty cool if it did.
Yeah.
I will say, I think it was Kevin Brown I was watching, you know, when the Orioles were playing the Yankees at the end of the season. And I think it was Kevin Brown who made a comment, and my fault, Kevin Brown, if it wasn't you, and I'm remembering wrong.
He's a big avid listener.
But definitely listens,
yeah. But, you know, he made a comment about Judge being the likely AL MVP.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I'm just like, there's no way, you know, I mean, for me, I mean, Shohei Ohtani, without barring injury, right, you can basically put him in stone as the AL MVP winner for the next 5 years, because he's an all-star offensively and pitching, like, independently, right? So there's just no way to compensate that value. It didn't matter if Judge hit 80 home runs, right? Like, there's no way to be a more valuable player in my mind than Ohtani doing what he's doing. So.
Yeah, I don't know. We're getting off topic here, but yeah, super quick. The thing that, you know, the big advantage that I always thought was you were getting both of that in one player. And I think the biggest advantage there is that you're getting it in like one contract, in one
roster spot,
one item on the payroll. But the roster spot, actually, like, that advantage goes away largely, because you have to go to the 6-man rotation. Fangraphs did a whole article on it, and I was fascinated by it. But they did a bunch of analysis, and basically, like, if you deploy him in a 6-man rotation, your extra roster spot doesn't really go to anything because you are constrained to using it to that pitcher to try to keep him healthy. So like where the advantage is you get all that production from one line item on your payroll, and then you get to, boast both of those for the $30 million that he's making next year, as opposed to paying $30 million to, an all-star DH and $30 million to a Cy Young contender.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, I would say that the all-star DH only type is kind of disappearing. I think there are still ones that will be that. Jose Abreu, I think, will be that, and Yordan Alvarez could eventually be that if he moves off, like if he doesn't play in the field every day. But I think the David Ortiz type in general isn't going to be as much of a thing. But yeah, I mean, if you compare it with being one of the top, 10 pitchers in the league too, that's pretty amazing. I would like that. Even though the Orioles were the team that, it was 2021. They had like the 19-game losing streak, and they snapped it against Shohei.
That's right.
Which is just
right.
Went off on him.
Scored 4 runs, I think.
Whoa.
Yeah. Right.
4 whole runs.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back on the Orioles. And I think I didn't mention what went wrong for the Orioles. That's where we left off. And I'll just make it real quick. I touched on it in what went right, where the health of the position players was good. The what went wrong is the injuries to the pitching staff. It was like all of the injuries were starting pitchers. It was John Means, which was a killer. Tyler Wells, who was the Orioles' best pitcher until he got hurt. Chris Ellis getting hurt, which, not that he was individually going to be a hugely important player for this team, but he 8 innings, and maybe his injury allowed the Orioles to see Austin Voth and Dean Kramer a little bit more. So maybe it ended up being kind of a positive, but still, you don't want somebody to get hurt. But yeah, I think that arguably made a 2 or 3 game difference losing John Means and Tyler Wells. All right, let's talk most valuable Oriole. This award was already given out by the Orioles press, but they didn't ask us our opinion, so we figured we'd give it now. The Orioles press did give Adley Rutschman the award for most valuable Oriole. Jesse, do you concur with that evaluation?
I do. I don't think it's as runaway as I think a lot of Orioles fans probably would, but I do.
Okay. Who else would be in contention?
Yeah, who'd be your runner-up?
I mean, I know he's a reliever, but I think Felix Bautista is in that conversation.
Oof, that's always a tough one because people
it's a hard sell.
Yeah, he's a reliever. Yep.
He is a reliever. All right, Eli, your thoughts on most valuable Oriole?
I concur with Adley Rutschman, and I do think it was a runaway.
Yeah.
Santander could being in contention for me. He definitely had a great season, but I don't know. I can't think of anybody who had a greater impact on this team than Adley, and I don't think it's particularly close.
What about Rougned Odor and his clubhouse vibes?
Well, Rougned Odor had an impact. It just might not have been in the same direction.
Oh man, I don't know. I mean,
no, I know. I think he was probably like. Well, I don't know.
We knew what Rougned Odor was going to be. I mean, we can't be mad at Odor, right? We knew exactly what he was going to be, and he did exactly what we expected him to.
Look,
right? It's not like we signed, I don't know. Yeah, it's not like we signed a great Robinson Cano and he turned into Rougned Odor's performance. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. Although Robinson Cano this year, I think I would have rather had Rougned Odor.
Right. No. I'm just saying, I'm thinking of a prime. A prime Robinson.
Look, I'm an Odor apologist in 2022, and now if he's on the team in 2023, we're gonna have to have some conversations. But I
don't know. I just think the vibes could have been there from the bench, and it wouldn't have hurt.
Anything. No, I agree with that. Especially as the season went on, you realize we got something here.
You're right.
Yes, I agree.
Put in the people who have the potential to play the best baseball. Yeah, and that was not what happened.
My pick for most valuable Oriole is also Adley Rutschman. I think I'm trying to think about who else could reasonably be in the conversation. I think maybe you think about Anthony Santander with the 33 home runs, but the total, he's not even a neutral on defense. He's a negative. He's a drain on the defensive side of things when he plays. And then the other one I would think about is Cedric Mullins, just because he was here all year. He played arguably Gold Glove defense, which we'll talk about in a second. Was not as good offensively as he was a year ago, but was still good. So those would probably be my three. I'd probably do Rutschman, Mullins, Santander if I had to vote, but Rutschman would be far and away the pick. All right, unsung hero. What's that?
Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, those are all, yeah. It makes it interesting, yeah. And I think you're also right. The fact that Adley wasn't there the first month, it makes it closer,
Yeah, it does. And he's a catcher, so he couldn't play as often as some of the other players. But yeah, it's just it coincides with the Orioles turnaround so much that he came up and then 2 weeks later they were playing really good.
Right.
So you kind of got to go with him. Kind of part of that conversation is the Unsung Hero Award. Who did we not give enough credit this year? Jesse, I'll go to you first.
Who? Now I'm kind of. Oh, who? Okay, I'm gonna say, I would say Dylan Tate for that.
Okay,
a bullpen guy.
Do you want to explain that at all?
Well, I just think
no.
I
don't want to explain it.
No, I do.
Okay.
He turned into just a critical piece. Of course, I mean, we could talk about the whole bullpen. We could talk about Perez being that, right? Perez is probably even a little more underrated than Tate is. Even Baker we could go to, right? But
just gonna name all the players.
No, no. So I think that right, we had since Lopez was our closer at the beginning of the year, right, Tate's role shuffled throughout the course of the year. He became the setup guy, and he did, and right, of course, Bautista's role, but he's not really, Bautista isn't really underrated. So I think Tate definitely was critical, got big outs for us in the one game against the Blue Jays. It was Tate that Brandon Hyde went to in the fifth or sixth inning or whatever, in that critical game that we basically had to win to keep any chance of making the playoffs alive. So I've always been a big Dylan Tate fan, and I don't think I underrate him in my mind, but I would definitely view him as the unsung hero from the Orioles team perspective.
Yeah, it's a solid pick. I can vibe with that. Eli, your pick.
Yeah, I was right in line with Jesse. I had written down Perez and Tate. I think that they were just such unbelievably steady contributors all year. Seeing how Perez just flew under the radar and had a 1.4 ERA. He put up almost 3 WAR as a reliever, which is, pretty substantial. I mean, both of them, we went to them in critical moments throughout the course of the year. They were just infallible, just totally steady throughout the year. There never seemed to be any huge upticks or downswings in their performance. Dylan Tate, over 70 plus innings, had a whip under 1. It's really pretty remarkable play. And I think they were, you can talk about Lopez and Bautista and the high octane stuff at the back of the bullpen, but I think those two guys were kind of the linchpins that kept the bullpen as a cohesive and productive unit throughout the course of the year. They're my unsung heroes.
Yeah, I think those are good picks. Perez was definitely on my radar for that because I think he got kind of, he's sort of a very traditional reliever in terms of you're on the edge of your seat when he pitches. Sometimes it gets a little dicey, but in the end he gets out of it. He sort of has those kind of early 2000 vibes of a reliever. I don't know if
Right.
that makes sense, but that's like how I think of a closing pitcher from my childhood is like, it might go completely terrible, but it's going to be exciting while it happens. I inevitably, I think I focused in on two other players though. One was Austin Voth, who we talked about earlier, because the dude just like came in with a horrific ERA, almost 30 years old. Like there was no shot he was going to be anything other than like roster filler for 2 weeks and then he'd be gone. Because we've seen that. We saw that this year with Logan Allen. He
Right.
reminded me like, oh, this is gonna be a Logan Allen situation. But Voth came in, figured something out. The Orioles and him just connected on whatever, and ended up being like the best pitcher for the Orioles. It seemed like down the stretch. It's every time he went out, it's like he's gonna throw 5 innings, allow a run, strike out 5, and then
Right.
it's gonna take over. So he's definitely in there. And I think the other guy that is like the perennial embodiment of this is Ramon Urias, because he just is like solid. He
Yeah.
definitely has his dips and stuff, but getting the third base job every day, I think he was really good with the glove. There's not a ton of pop in his bat, but he puts the ball in play, doesn't strike out a whole lot, is really solid. I would love to see him stay on this team in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure he's an everyday player, but I'd love to see him as the guy that can fill in at second, short, third, give Jorge a day off, Gunnar a day off. And like, I think you still get him in the lineup 3 days a week with that sort of formula. So
Yeah.
I think those are the two for me. Maybe you give Voth the nod because he was so unexpected, whereas Urias is like, has been an everyday player on this team for 2 years now. But those two were hugely important to this team.
Agreed.
Definitely.
Cool. All right, let's talk Cy Young. Jesse, I feel like you deserve the floor on this one because you made a preseason prediction on who could not I don't think you picked them as your Cy Young.
Right.
You brought up their name.
I said if Means got hurt, which is
Okay.
exactly what ended up happening. I could see this situation playing out. But yeah, I mean Dean Kramer. I mean, if we're not giving it to Felix Bautista, who I also think is in contention for the Cy Young Award, right, for the Orioles.
Yeah.
If we're not doing that, then definitely Dean Kramer as a starting pitcher. So I think it's between the two of them.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, the thing for me, it's really hard to make a case against Bautista because he was basically as good as you could possibly realistically be as a bullpen guy. So I mean, obviously Bautista is more dominant. He I would say he performed closer to like the top potential in a given role, right? Like if you take the ideal closer ever, or the ideal starting pitcher
Right.
ever, right? Like Felix Bautista got closer to the ideal than Dean Kramer got to being a starter. Yeah, so it's I don't know. In my mind, it's really tough between those two. But I mean, Dean Kramer was basically so impressive all year too, in basically a year he had to be. I mean, if he really struggled this year, I think the Orioles would have started looking in other directions and at other options. So, I don't know. I'm really torn between the both of them. But
Do you think Dean Kramer did enough for you to say that the Orioles won the Manny Machado trade?
No, I would not. No, that is definitely it is Manny Machado, and of course with the year he had, But I definitely think that Dean Kramer is one of the starters next year. I think that spot is solidified for him.
Yeah, maybe opening day starter. We'll talk.
There's a good chance.
Yeah.
I mean, probably the Orioles will sign somebody, but if the Orioles went into next year with these available starters, I mean, he'd be a 1 or a 2 for sure, So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So you are going Batista though as your Cy Young, but Dean's right behind him. Is that what you're saying? It's not that big of a
Do you
deal.
want us to come back to you?
Yeah, I'll go Bautista.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Eli, what do you think?
Yeah, Bautista's mine. I know it's controversial, but I think that Zach Britton should have won it in 2016 or whatever it was. I think Bautista was just so unbelievably dominant. You gotta just love his story. Like, signed as a minor league free agent. He came up through, I think he started in low A last year and then went high A, double A, and triple A all in 1 year.
Yeah, something
Like,
insane.
yeah, broke camp with us. And he's just thrown, 102 mile an hour ched with, two like wipeout put away pitches. The slider he doesn't even really use because the splitter is one of the best splitters on the planet. It's like, the guy was phenomenal all year, and you just kind of, I think he could have held down the closer position all year. I think that, Lopez was obviously phenomenal for us, and it's nothing against him, but you just look at Bautista, and from the moment that he came up, he was willing to step into big situations, and he was able to keep his composure through them. And because of that, he's my guy. I cannot get through this section without giving a shout out to Jordan Lyles, though.
Right.
He was like everything you could have possibly asked for and so much more. He was, he 8 innings, but he did so wildly effectively. He would go 7 innings of 2-run ball against the Yankees. He was phenomenal for us. And so I have to give the shout out to Lyles. Jesse talked about Kramer. Good stuff.
Yeah, I'll give it a clean sweep for Bautista, just because, not that he's that young, but he's that inexperienced to just come in and take that role over, make it his own. And the Orioles now enter the offseason without a hole at closer, I think, which I'm not sure that I saw that being the case. Like, if you asked me in April, will the Orioles be looking for a closer this offseason? I probably would have said yeah. But now they don't have to do that. He had the knee stuff at the end, but that sounds like that's not a big deal. They're just protecting him.
Right.
And I think kind of in the same vein as you mentioning Lyles, I'll mention Spencer Watkins. This is more of an unsung hero type of a situation, because Watkins obviously wasn't like dominant or anything, but after having the season that he did in 2021 being like dreadful, and I think a lot of people saying like, why is this dude keep getting chances? He came up and was like super important to this team being stable. He, wasn't lights out or anything, but threw over 100 innings. He cut his ERA basically in half this year. So I think he played the role that I expected Bruce Zimmerman to play most of the year.
Right.
So maybe the like net outcome wasn't really much different than we expected from like the 5th guy in the rotation, but still really valuable in its own way. But yeah, Bautista clearly for me is the guy. All right, let's move to the Gold Glove contenders section. There are some guys in the Orioles this year that I think could win a Gold Glove, and I think it's kind of obvious who they are, but I'm interested to hear your guys' take and maybe, who you think individually was the best fielder on the Orioles and who you think could actually win a Gold Glove. So Eli, maybe I'll go to you first. Do you want to give me who you think like the absolute best fielder on the 2022 Baltimore Orioles was?
Yeah, absolute best to go Jorge Mateo. I think that's a, non-controversial pick. He was phenomenal. He was super steady. He was just doing things that, Tyler, you brought up the comparison of JJ Hardy, not because of their similarity, but because of the style of shortstop that they play, and just like how Hardy was this, he did some pre-pitch positioning. He was very smart about how he set himself, and then he would just like do the routine very, very consistently. And Mateo, seemingly can handle all of the routine stuff, but then you'll see him flying out in the hole behind second base, whirling and twirling. He seemingly perfected the like 1-2 hop throw to Mountcastle as he's like deep in the 5.5 hole. And he was just doing all this really stupendous stuff, along with leading the league in stolen bases. Not that that's a factor in a Gold Glove, but he was super exciting all year. And so I give it to Jorge Mateo. We have Mullins written on the outline, and I will let you guys address him. For me, like, I don't think people usually do knock him for the arm, of course, and I think that'll keep him away from another Gold Glove. But somebody we don't have on the outline that is a surprise contender. I'm not fully sure that he'll get it.
I think I know who you're gonna say.
But
Go
Ryan
ahead.
Mountcastle, I mean, he was really phenomenal, and in the top 20-25% on Baseball Savant for outs above average. So I'll be interested to see if he gets some votes and how high he climbs. But I mean, that was a wild development that I never could have seen coming in a million years. It seemed like he was just slated to play first base until you found somebody who could kick him to DH. And
Right.
he's been phenomenal over there this year, and a welcome improvement.
Well, and we had tried him out at third like a while ago, and he did not work, right?
He was drafted as a shortstop.
Right.
Yeah.
The fact he found a home over at first is nice. Now he just has to hit well enough to stay over there.
Which that's a whole discussion, I think, for the offseason too, of like his numbers aren't good this year, but he was hitting the ball really hard. They weren't good for a first baseman. But
right.
I don't know. We'll talk about it. But Jess, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think of course Mateo is the easy, pick. I think he should win a Gold Glove, and if he doesn't, I'm going to be upset about it. Let me just say that.
Okay.
So there's that. Mountcastle, he is good, and he was definitely a surprise, like Eli talked about. Every once in a while, he would frustrate me because he wouldn't pick a ball. I felt like he should have, but overall, the numbers are there, the metrics are there. Like, he absolutely was a good first baseman. And as far as Mullins goes, he's definitely exactly what we expected. Obviously great defensively, but I think he's going to fall short of a Gold Glove this year too. So,
yeah, I think I concur with you guys. I won't, belabor the point. I think Jorge Mateo might not win the Gold Glove, but I think he definitely should be a finalist. I'm not sure. I think, was it Nicky Lopez? Somebody was like slightly above him on a list or whatever, but he should definitely be a finalist. And it's so out of left field that he became this kind of Gold Glove guy. He had the athleticism, but I don't think that was kind of his calling card when the Orioles got him was, oh yeah, he's like this plus defender that's got a future as a Gold Glove winner. A little disappointed you guys didn't mention Brett Phillips as a Gold Glove contender. Really solid in the 2 weeks he was an Oriole.
That's true.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Well, what's crazy is, I don't know, he's probably up there on the outs above average leaderboard.
Yeah.
He just none of that time was with us.
What about Rutschman?
Yeah.
Was he not up long enough, or?
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely deserving. I guess I just didn't think that he's been up long enough. I don't know. I'm also in my mind right now questioning why I didn't immediately jump to that, because he's phenomenal. I think that was a brain fart on my part. I don't know. Maybe you guys have more reasoning. But I don't know. Yeah, he could definitely get knocked by not being up long enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what stands out to me is he wasn't up long enough. Offensively, he had some struggles to start. I can't say that I looked back and looked at what he did in the first month defensively to say, whether he was elite or not. But yeah, I think it's tough to come up and say this guy that's played a month and a half less than these other guys is going to get the Gold Glove. But I think that him being up is an important part of the pitching staff being better too. I don't think it's a mistake or random that the pitchers got better, Rutschman was up. It's all connected. Now, how much does that play into the Gold Glove? I don't know. That Gold Glove voting is weird that way, because there is an offensive component to it. As much as we don't want to think there is. So I could see again where he's like a finalist or something, because he's a big name now relatively, but it probably will end up going to somebody else, Trevino or something with the Yankees, because he was an all-star and he's a Yankee, and he was good this year. So I don't know. Jesse, any thoughts on Rutschman?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he got it. Of course, he is very good defensively, but yeah, I feel like someone else will get it.
Fair enough. Okay, let's go into the dugout and talk about Brandon Hyde.
Hey, Tyler, I just went and looked up some outs above average leaderboards and wanted to share. So,
Please.
Rutschman, they do not quantify outs above average because he's a catcher.
Right.
But Ryan Mountcastle was second in the American League. Owen Miller had 4 outs above average. Ryan Mountcastle had 3.
For first
Jorge
base,
Mateo,
right?
Say it again.
For his position.
Yeah, for first baseman. Yeah. Jorge Mateo for shortstops actually was first in the American League. There are 4 National League shortstops ahead of him. But yeah, he is 5th in MLB, and the next is Nick Allen, who is 8th in MLB, and I don't think it's going to Nick Allen. Immediately after is Nicky Lopez, who by some of the defensive metrics was better. Yeah. And then Cedric Mullins was, I guess we can say, 4th in the American League behind Jose Siri, Miles Straw, and Byron Buxton.
Okay, so that seems right.
Yeah, all of these guys are like worthy, I guess is the point. And it's kind of nice to say we've got multiple plus defenders on the team, just as a general note.
Yeah. And theoretically, that'll go even better next year with Rutschman being up all year, Henderson playing a position all year. Yeah, that's cool. Nice. Thank you for that, Eli.
Here to help.
Okay, and let's talk Brandon Hyde. He's been sort of I don't know. People are very split on Brandon Hyde, it seems. I'm definitely in his corner, but I think first we talk about 2 things. One is, since we're talking awards here, is maybe his candidacy and his stake to claim Manager of the Year awards in the American League. And then maybe we talk about his role with the Orioles and sort of what we think he's going to do with the Orioles moving forward. So Jesse, maybe I'll go to you first and let's talk about Brandon Hyde as the Manager of the Year in the American League. Do you think he's the guy? If not him, who else is in contention? And ultimately, yeah, I guess, is he going to win it?
Based upon how the award is historically been distributed, it's normally given to the manager of the team that has the sort of biggest surprise or the biggest turnaround. So I think it makes sense that Hyde will get the award. I think, you know, I would say he's 70-80% chance likely to get the award. I think he's a heavy favorite to get it. The award is never generally given to like the manager of an already good team. So someone like Dave Roberts is never going to get the award, or someone like Dusty Baker is never going to get the award.
Dave Roberts has gotten the award.
He has in the past, right, when he turned the Dodgers around, but he's not going to get it with this Dodgers team, and Dusty Baker isn't going to get it with this Astros team, right? So despite, you know, in my view, you know, solid reasoning for them to get the award, but no, I mean, I think that I think, as I said, I think Hyde is a heavy favorite to get the award. I mean, the Orioles were talked about this year basically as the best story in baseball, and of course we really pulled off some Orioles magic this year, and Hyde obviously had a big role in that. So I do think he's going to be Manager of the Year. I think he's deserving of it, even though I think the award is somewhat nonsensical in general. And I just say that because I think, you know, the public does not see 98% of what managers do throughout the course of the year. So I think it's really hard to give the award. And I think the fact that the award always goes to, you know, basically whoever the manager that turned, you know, the team around is indicative of the fact that we don't really have a good way to distribute the award. So the only other possible candidate, I think, is Scott Service of the Mariners. Of course, he does have the advantage of having a playoff team, which the Orioles do not have. But even with that said, we had talked about earlier, the Mariners were just a better team, period, had better players, had a better rotation lineup. They had the benefit of Julio Rodriguez all year. So, I think it's despite Service helping the Mariners turn around this playoff drought that they've had forever, and they've had a few years of sort of just missing the playoffs. The Mariners were just a much better team in general, and less shocking that they are good and competitive than the Orioles. So that's why I definitely think Hyde is going to get it.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah, it does seem to be, because it's voted on, it seems to be whatever team has the greatest outcome compared to what the writer's expectation is of that team. And some years that's probably just based off of like a miscalculation from the writers, but I think this year it is fair to say that the Orioles by far outperformed expectations across the board. Eli, what are your thoughts on Hyde maybe taking home AL Manager of the Year?
Yeah, I largely agree with everything Jess said. I think that there is, I don't know, there's also kind of a bias toward like the Bob Melvins and Kevin Cashes in the sense that they're managing low payroll teams, which was also the case for Hyde this year, and performing well on, payroll comparable to Max Scherzer's salary was, it's an accomplishment. And I don't know. Yeah, like Orioles fans had a lot of problems with Hyde. I guess this will be a little bit more of a conversation we'll get into in a minute. But, it's like there are questions in today's game as to what role a manager is really playing when so much of this is driven by, your analytical computational teams. And basically the matchups that they put out, you all know what I'm saying. But yeah, just there are questions as to like what sway the manager has in personnel decisions. And I think that's valid on this Orioles team. I think there are a lot of questions as to how much input Brandon Hyde has in the day-to-day lineup, into what pitchers are getting innings at what times, etc. So I think that's a pretty interesting discussion to have. But for the purposes of this award, I think it's pretty difficult to argue with a 31 game swing from year to year with, largely the same personnel.
Yeah, I think the other name I would throw in there as a candidate is John Schneider of the Blue Jays, because he took over obviously a very talented team that a lot of money got spent on, but he took over midseason after they fired Montoyo, which is kind of a tough spot to be in. Clearly, I mean, I will say, like, the reporting at the time indicated that it wasn't like the Blue Jays players were mad with Montoyo or didn't like him, or, it wasn't like it was dysfunction in the clubhouse. It sounds like they just felt like they needed somebody that was going to be a little bit more like, I guess, pump him up a little bit. It sounded like Montoyo kind of just let them walk all over him and was like a player's manager, and they actively wanted somebody to be a little bit more hard-nosed. But Schneider took over a difficult situation and got them into the playoffs, and I think that will garner him some votes. I feel like the Mariners manager, Cervase, might take it, because they snapped like whatever the longest
the drought
21
professional
years
sports of like not going to the playoffs. That's like just sounds very, like, on paper, that's very impressive sounding. Obviously they were on the doorstep of that last year, and you could argue they kind of collapsed last year to knock it in, but
you could argue they collapsed this year too.
That's
it's
true.
Just we were also collapsing at the same time.
I mean,
Right.
the other thing about that too is I don't know what I was gonna say.
That is another thing. Well, if you think of it, bring it up. But yeah, I think that's my guess is, at the end of the day, Cervase is gonna get the award with Hyde in second and Schneider maybe third, because other than that, I can't really see anybody in the AL getting it, because it's a lot of the same teams that always is.
I don't think anyone else is going to get it, and I don't think this honorable mention has any shot to get it. But the one other person I would say is Terry Francona for the Guardians, because they are a really good team. Obviously, I mean, the playoffs is not supposed to factor into the decision making, even though it obviously will. I mean, even the Mariners winning the series against the Blue Jays, that, is going to help Cervase's case, I think. But
they vote on it. I think they have already voted on it before the postseason started, so it doesn't impact.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, Terry Francona with the Guardians. I mean, this is a really young team. They got a couple key veterans, that obviously play a massive role. But I mean, if you look at their lineup up and down, I mean, there are so many first-year players, so many guys just kind of finding their way in the big leagues, and he has really done a great job with them, despite how much it pains me to be saying this, because I hate, anybody affiliated with the Red Sox, of course, let alone the manager who, broke their drought. So, but, in all seriousness, like, he definitely, deserves a lot of respect for what he's done with them.
Yeah, and that's definitely part of like Eli's point about low payroll or like small market, because the Guardians they trade away everybody that's good. And they were crazy good in September. They went 21-8 in September. Yeah. To really run away with that division, which is the weakest division in baseball, but
for sure.
Yeah.
But Jesse made a point about them being young. They are the youngest team in the game. So
yeah,
it's probably a factor going for them.
And they had a pretty big swing in wins this year. They won a good chunk more than they did a year ago. So I think that's a good point. All right, back to Hyde for a second. Let's just talk about Hyde. And I think, Jesse, you brought up a good point about what goes into the decisions on the field, because I made this point on Camden Chat last week, where basically the title of the article, I think, was the Orioles finally gave Brandon Hyde a talented roster and it paid off. This is the first time the Orioles have had any sort of major league level talent actually at the major leagues while Hyde has been the manager. We talked earlier about how they got outscored this year. So their Pythagorean win losses was like the opposite, was like 79 and 83, but they went 83 and 79. I think all of that points to the fact that what Brandon Hyde is doing in terms of like what a manager is supposed to be doing or is expected to do in the modern game is a net positive for the team. He's maintained a good, solid clubhouse. That's what all the reports that come out about him, or not reports that come out about him, but all the quotes that come out of the Orioles. Jordan Lyles said something about it in one of his final starts, saying like the clubhouse culture is great. And part of that is Rougned Odor, Robinson Chirinos, yada, 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 all those guys being really good. I think John Means has talked about Brandon Hyde and having really good talks with him. Trey Mancini has said things. All this is just to say that I think what Brandon Hyde does in his job is really excellent as far as like what he has control over. And I think that a lot of people, especially on Orioles Twitter, get upset with him about lineups or pitching changes or whatever else it may be. And these are things that are not entirely his decision to be made. And I personally I've been pleasantly surprised with the job Hyde has done this year. I know, Jesse, you've mentioned some things about bullpen decisions, but Hyde has been really impressive to me in terms of how he handles himself, the clubhouse culture, and he is not actively holding the team back. I think he's a net positive, and I'm excited for him to be the manager in 2023. Now, beyond 2023, I will say nothing is guaranteed. Expectations are going to be raised, all of that stuff. And if the team falls short, I think the playoffs likely are the goal next year. If the Orioles don't make the playoffs next year, then we reevaluate. But I think in the immediate future, I like Brandon Hyde as the Orioles manager. Jess, what do you think?
Well, I was kind of thinking about the irony. I mean, we have been critical of Hyde, throughout the course of the year. Of course, it is true. Elias, is probably in his head when he's making in-game decisions, right? And of course, Elias has a lot to do with setting the lineup every day and that sort of thing. That's for sure. Of course, I mean, it's hard for us, I mean, we kind of have to hold Hyde accountable for those things because on the, on the surface, like those are supposed to be his decisions theoretically. I mean, it's hard for us to distinguish if there's like a puppet master, behind him, like, and to what extent they're pulling the strings, right? So yeah, so I do find it somewhat ironic, right? I mean, me and Eli thought Hyde was going to get it. You think Cervase might get it for the Mariners, but I mean, I feel like we have been critical of Hyde. I remember a few episodes ago, Eli was talking about why Stowers was not getting more at bats instead of Hayes, right? There have been these sorts of things all throughout the year that have been coming up. So yeah, I mean, that is a thing. But obviously with all that said, right, like the results, for the Orioles this year have been there. But right, I mean, again, I think you raise a good question too, Tyler, is like, well, how much is that actually Brandon Hyde, right? I mean, how much is that Hyde? The Orioles probably wouldn't have been anywhere close to this if Adley had not come up and we had just had like Chirinos and like Ben Boom or something like that playing catcher all year. Like our results probably would have just been as disastrous as the previous year, so right, is that, I mean, obviously, all the factors are influencing everything and you can't isolate like, one player or whatever in a vacuum, or one manager in a vacuum. Obviously everything influences everything else, but right, like, is it Hyde, or in some ways is Hyde like benefiting and from a lot of the forces that are going on around him, and obviously it's probably a factor of both, right? But yeah,
I think it's fair. Until we get some sort of reporting done that lays out exactly how the Orioles decision making takes place, which I don't see happening because the Orioles are like the most tight-lipped organization in Major League Baseball, it seems. Right. We kind of have to just assume that there's a black box there, and you judge Brandon Hyde based on how he conducts himself and clubhouse culture that we can see, and winning makes all that stuff a lot easier, and the Orioles did a good amount of winning this year, so we'll see. Eli, what's your takeaway on maybe Brandon Hyde, the job he's doing, and moving forward?
Yeah, I think at the very least, he should be here next year and he should have our support going into it. This year was a success, and we expect that the front office will bring in some more talent in this upcoming year. We expect that the Orioles will continue to take steps forward. And I don't know, like you said, Tyler, you give him a talented roster, and we gave him one this year, and if we give him a more talented one next year, there's no reason to suspect that he won't make the most of it. So we go in, I think, he should keep our support. I think, like, on the whole, there are always going to be some stuff that we disagree with managers on, as the, like, the couch coaches that we all are. So I'm not convinced that he's done anything so egregious that I, don't trust his decision making on the whole or anything. So he's got my support. I'm ready to rock for next year, and I think I think we give him a little bit more and we see what happens. See if we can't make a playoffs here.
I mean, and for anybody critical, I mean, I think it was pretty universal. The Orioles had like faith in Buck Showalter when he was the manager, and then he like left Britton in the bullpen. So, right. managers can be kind of finicky in that way. So.
Yeah, and that's a whole element of it too, is you have to have the players to make it work. And we all loved Buck until the 2018 season was an absolute disaster. And if you look at the roster that started that year, it's not like it was a totally devoid of talent roster. But now Buck's with the Mets, and they spent a whole lot of money, and they were very good this year. And he seems to have learned from the Britton mistake, because he left Edwin Diaz in maybe a little long last night after the Mets took the lead, but I guess better than the inverse there.
That was wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially with we're recording this before the decisive game 3, and
Right.
you would imagine Edwin Diaz has to be available in some way, shape, or form tonight, but probably not at 100%. So we'll see.
I was also going to say, I get bringing Diaz in earlier than the 9th, but he was facing 8-9-1. So it's not like he even saved him for Machado and Bell. And so that was also bizarre a little bit. So
it was. And this will immediately be aged by whatever happens today. We're recording on the day of game 3. So maybe it works out, hopefully. Yeah. Okay, cool. That sounds good. I'm excited about Brandon Hyde for now until we go on like a 10-game losing skid and suddenly the playoffs are a lot tougher to expect. But let's do a little bit off-season sort of preview here in terms of looking at the expiring contracts the Orioles have coming up. The Orioles don't have a ton of guys. I listed 4 players here. There may be a few more that are, minor league guys or whatever, but these are sort of the 4 guys that the Orioles had on the roster in 2022 that it's sort of up in the air in terms of if they come back in 2023. And those 4 guys are Rougned Odor, Robinson Chirinos, Jesus Aguilar, and Jordan Lyles. Now, Lyles does have an $11 million option for 2023. And I believe the buyout for it is like $500,000. So
it's $1 million.
$1 million.
Yeah.
Okay. And he made $7 million this year. So it would be a jump up for Lyles there. But yeah, let's talk about those 4. And, Eli, maybe I'll go to you first. You can talk about them in order or just kind of, quickly go through it. But of those 4, do you see any of them coming back? If so, maybe explain why, or if you had any tough decisions to make there.
Yeah, I can see Jordan Lyles coming back. Admittedly, I've wavered on this, and I'm not sure I have my mindset one way or another. Well, I guess I should start. Rougned Odor, Robinson Chirinos, and Jesus Aguilar are all gone.
Okay.
But yeah, Lyles, I think, is a super interesting question here because, like, I don't know. If you had told me that he had this season without, like, at the beginning of last year, if you would have told me that he was going to put together the season he was, and you would not have told me anything else about the Orioles rotation, I would have said this was a no-brainer. But the fact that, somebody like a Spencer Watkins actually was reasonably successful this year. And at the same time, Voth came along, Kramer picked it up. Bradish started to look like a pitcher. Tyler Wells was effective as he was. And we're getting John Means back next year. I am a huge proponent of rotation depth. Like, you look over at the Dodgers, and Tony Gonsolin's been stuck in the bullpen for like 12 years, but he comes out this year and he's an all-star, Clayton Kershaw's down for almost the whole year. They're like losing guys left and right. Bueller's out for the rest of the year. That is what makes a World Series contender rather than a playoff contender, is, I think, that kind of depth and that kind of like fortitude, in the face of an injury. And so I want to say pick up Jordan Lyles, no question about it. But I am a little bit skeptical that it happens because, I mean, in my mind, I'm like doubtful as to how much the Orioles will truly escalate the payroll this year, partially in anticipation of like a Gunnar or an Adley extension. And I look at, like the $10 million decision, the $11 million option minus the $1 million buyout. I look at that $10 million decision and I say, like, well, does that turn us from like a mid-tier starter like Chris Bassett or something into a Carlos Rodon if we have an extra $10 million to spend next year? And given that we do already seemingly have some depth here with Voth, with Kramer, with Bradish, with Wells, with Watkins, not to mention Grayrod coming up next year. There are a lot of options. And I didn't even mention like DL Hall, that there are a lot of arms who seemingly could be pretty effective next year. And that puts Jordan Lyles into question for me. I feel bad because it has nothing to do with him. He did everything he possibly could have to get this option picked up. But it is in doubt.
Well, I mean, what I will say, and Jesse, maybe you were about to say this, so sorry to steal your thunder, is that they could turn down the option and still re-sign him to less than $11 million, or I guess, less than $10 million.
Yeah, that's definitely true too.
Which
or we could also pick up the option and trade him. I think that's another remote possibility too. Pull a Jose Iglesias on him.
Yeah, Jess, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of. I kind of do think the Orioles will take him back. And I do think the Orioles will pick up the option. Right. I think if there is just this giant surplus of pitching depth next year and he just doesn't fit in the rotation, right, he could be a trade piece at the deadline. I think that's definitely an option. I mean, I think that if the Orioles decline the option, I think Lyles would be looking to make more money than what the second year of this contract is, because he had such a great year last year. So I don't think he would make a lot more, but I think he would be expecting at least that, because his value, dramatically, I think, increased over the last year. So, granted, the Orioles were kind of signing him from a position of weakness, right? Like, don't get me wrong, that is true. At the time, we needed pitching depth and we sort of needed Lyles. So, it's arguable we overpaid a little bit for him, right? But overall, I wouldn't be surprised if Lyles came into next year, like, at least wanting that number. So I'm not sure the declining the option and then re-signing really works. What I would say that
the trade is that you give him more years,
right?
Like you give him 2-3 years instead of the one, and you get
right. True, so, right? Yeah, that's a good point. Again, I mean, from the Orioles' perspective, I don't think a longer term deal makes sense, right? I think if Lyles returns, it needs to be a 1-year thing. So there's that. The only other thing I would say, Eli was pretty dismissive of the 3 other options. The only thing I would say, not outdoor, don't get real worried. But as far as Chirinos, he's okay. Well, let me make my point here. I think a lot of it depends on what playing time they expect Adley to get next year and how much they expect him to be behind the plate. If they really anticipate ramping up the number of innings that he catches, and if he doesn't DH as frequently as he did this year, I could see Chirinos being obviously a cheap option to back him up. I think that if Adley, if our backup catcher is going next year, is going to be playing the amount of time, anything comparable to what Chirinos was playing this year, I definitely think the Orioles want to try to find an upgrade for him. But if it turns into a situation where Chirinos catches, basically just Sundays, day game after night game sort of thing, which I expect the Orioles are going to be a little more treating Adley with kids' gloves than that. But if they really do anticipate ramping up Adley's innings, I could see Chirinos coming back as a cheap option, especially if Adley, of course they say Adley loves working with, Chirinos. Of course, that's the storyline. Who knows how irreplaceable Adley feels Chirinos is for knowledge and insight and that sort of thing. But regardless, if Adley really does love Chirinos and for whatever reason they are a really good pair together, and Adley is going to be playing a much larger percentage of catcher next year and is going to reduce Chirinos' innings next year, then I could see Chirinos coming back. But if it's anything like what it was this year, I think the Orioles need to definitely find a better option.
Yeah, I don't see Chirinos coming back because I think what you just said is that's the outcome is going to be they're going to want to DH more. Adley more often. And this
Right.
goes back to what I've said for months, is that I think Anthony Santander is on the block because they don't want an everyday DH. And that's kind of what Santander is turning into, because he's pretty much unplayable in the field. So they want that DH slot open so they can shuffle Adley in there. The name that's popped up a lot already early is Wilson Contreras from the Cubs, talking about basically going back and forth with him and Adley, DH and catcher, which is an interesting, like, I don't know if a team has done that before, had like two all-star level players at the same position and actively gone 50-50 with them. But it's an idea. I don't mind it, but I don't know. Back to the Lyles thing for a second. Like, I don't think Lyles was good this year for what the Orioles wanted him for. He ate the innings, all that stuff. But if you look at his numbers, they're pretty much like almost across the board. If you don't look at ERA, which I know that's a tough number to ignore, but almost all of his numbers across the board are identical to what they were in Texas last year. He threw one less inning. He allowed two more hits. His whip was 1.389 last year. It was 1.385 this year. He had 2.8 walks per nine last year, 2.6 walks per nine this year, 7.3 strikeouts per nine last year, 7.2 strikeouts per nine this year. He was largely the same pitcher. I think in general, pitching in the league was slightly worse this year, which makes him a little better this year in like percentiles and all that stuff. But I think Jordan Lyles was essentially the same pitcher, and he's now a year older. I'm not sure that he goes out on the free agent market and gets $10 million. So I could see the Orioles saying like, yeah, Jordan, we'd love to have you back. Maybe at what you made this year, maybe a little bit less, because, hey, we've got Grayson Rodriguez coming up. We've signed Chris Bassett. We've got Dean Kramer looking really good. Like, you're probably going to be our 5 this year, and we really love you, but not at $11 million. So that would be like a game I think they play this offseason. But I think the Orioles, they can't sign a pitcher just with the mindset of trading them anymore. I think we're kind of beyond that at this point. And for all that depth and stuff, I think that you hope the Orioles have found that secret sauce for developing pitchers, which I think they may have a little bit, because you've seen them do it with Voth. You saw Bradish kind of figure things out. And also Bradish is an example of it, coming over from the Angels as like a relief pitching prospect, essentially. And the Orioles turning him into a viable starter in the big leagues. So I think like, yeah, Lyles could be back as a back end of the rotation guy as insurance until Means gets back, but you're not going to pay that guy $11 million to do that. So that would be my one caveat, is I could see Lyles back on a reduced salary, but yeah, the other three I think are gone. I think, Jesse, you joked before about Odor coming back on a minor league contract. I don't think that's like totally impossible, but I would say probably not with the Orioles, because there is now sort of, they have the infield prospects that are at AAA, and I just don't see it happening.
Right. We have the depth to replace him.
Jordan
Right.
Westberg, Joey Ortiz, like they're here.
Vavra, Odias, right. Yeah.
They're ready to go. So I think those guys have played an important role in developing the chemistry and the culture in the locker room. And I think that does have value that you can't get on a stat sheet, but I think we've got that value now, and it's time to move on to bigger and better things in 2023. So, yeah.
I had one last note,
Mhm.
just with regard to Chirinos. We did go out and we picked up Cam Gallagher in September, and then there was also, we just added Anthony Bemboom to the 40-man to protect him from minor league free agency. So I do think there's like, I don't know, I think the Orioles are gearing up for another like backup catcher competition next year to see what happens. I don't anticipate adding a 4th catcher to the 40-man. That doesn't really make sense to me. In Chirinos, that is.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting when they get to protecting players for the Rule 5, because I know Maverick Hanley is Rule 5 eligible, although I know he's also not like a top prospect or anything. So they might not protect him, but yeah, I hear what you're saying there.
It's a good call. Yeah.
All right. So that kind of concludes our look back at the 2022 Orioles. We did have one little bit of news here at the end we wanted to touch on. which was that the Orioles are expected to sign a new lease with Camden Yards and the Maryland Stadium Authority to keep them in Baltimore for, I think it's another 5 years at least. I think that's what they're exercising is a one-time option to extend their stay at Camden Yards for 5 years. In addition to that, you have I think it was I don't know exactly what part of the Maryland legislature approved it, but there's a bunch of money going into the Camden Yards Sports Complex that will improve Oriole Park and M&T Bank Stadium and the parking lots and all that jazz. And then also the Orioles, this week, the news came out that they are planning to get new bids for the concessions contract at Camden Yards. It's basically all these indications that the Orioles are putting things in place to stay at Camden Yards for quite a while here. So Eli, what do you think about this news? Are you surprised by it? And do you think it'll stave off some future speculations on a move to Nashville, which has been basically an annual story around the Orioles for a decade now, at least?
Yeah. Hopefully this will keep people quiet for a little bit. Yeah, I think that the Orioles have a good setup here. Like the park is pretty much renowned as one of the more beautiful ones in the game. Like every list you look at, it's in the top 5, top 10. It's credited with like bringing in this new like style of ballparks. Pretty much every park that you see that is created nowadays has some element of Camden Yards in it. And I think just as a whole, the Orioles have a good setup here. And yeah, I mean, this lease is an indication that ownership agrees largely. And even in the midst of, as they're potentially looking to sell the team, they're convinced that staying in Baltimore is a good thing, even, for a prospective buyer. They're saying that this Camden Yards setup is a good one for us. And Baltimore, takes care of the team in such a way that, there will be a stable source of funding for whoever's coming in to look at buying this team. So I think, it definitely like Baltimore is good for business, I guess is what it says. And that's comforting, of course, as a dedicated Orioles fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Jesse, are you excited about this news of a lease being extended? This is the spicy baseball news we care about.
I mean, yeah, it's good, from an Orioles fan perspective. So I don't have a lot to say, but yeah, it's good. So
yeah, fair enough. And just to correct some things I said a moment ago, it was under the General Assembly last spring and signed into law by Governor Larry Hogan that the Stadium Authority could borrow up to $1.2 billion to pay for stadium improvements, which would be $600 million each to the Orioles and Ravens. And then in terms of the length of the lease, although it has not officially been signed yet, the information there was that the lease was set to expire at the end of 2021. In February of 2021, the two sides, the Orioles and the Stadium Authority, agreed to an extension through December 31st of 2023. And there was the right for the Orioles to sign a one-time 5-year extension by February 1st of 2023. So I think it's assumed that this extension is that 5-year extension, which would put them through, I guess, the end of 2028, but it theoretically could be a lot longer than that. We don't know, but that is the latest there. That wraps up all our topics. This was our 99th episode, actually, of the show. So in the coming weeks, months, we are going to try to do a 100th episode special, kind of that gets away from day-to-day Orioles news and talks more about our thoughts on the team and our lifelong passion for the Orioles. We'll get more information on that as we put it together. In addition to that, we are going to put together an offseason preview episode that should be out right around the conclusion of the World Series. So keep an eye out for that. Apart from that, just thank you all for listening to us this season. It's been a really fun time. I know our cadence for episode releases has been a little bit slower this year than in years past, but I think that's just sort of a byproduct of us being 3 busy people, and trying to get together to do a podcast from 3 different states is not always the easiest endeavor, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I don't know if you guys have anything to say to the audience this year, but yeah.
I mean, it's obviously it's been a really exciting Orioles year, and we love talking about it. So yeah, definitely, it was good. Yeah, I mean as you said, sorry to cut you off. As you said, Tyler, I mean, right, the obviously the scheduling, sort of the rhythm on our part of releasing episodes and stuff, we're gonna try to kind of be more on point with that next year. But yeah.
Is it my time, Jess?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. This year was super fun. Definitely, it's like, I don't know, maybe because the last few years were so bad, but and it's also partially because I pay more attention than I did when I was younger. But this was probably like the highest level of like gratification that I've gotten from baseball, and that's partially a result of like interacting with the community on Twitter. That's partially a result of doing this podcast with you guys. It's been a lot of fun, and it's nice to see the Orioles winning. This was a winning season, which is just like
Crazy.
we didn't really acknowledge that. This was a winning season for the Baltimore Orioles, and that just feels good to say. It feels good to look at where we're going next year. We still have, like, Fangraphs just put out. We still have 7 prospects in their top 100. Like, we've got this stacked farm system. We've got a ton of depth to trade from. We've got talent in the major leagues. It's just like
surreal,
and an abundance of happiness out here in Birdland. So yeah, feels good.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be a fun offseason. I think the most fun offseason in, even during the winning years with Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette. I think this is setting up to be even more interesting than those. Yeah, good time to be an Orioles fan. So yeah, thank you all for joining us this year. And hopefully we'll have some content coming to you throughout the offseason. If you want to keep tabs on that, what you should do is subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, which we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts. We are wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out there. And if you can, give us a rating, a review. That helps the algorithm send us to more Orioles fans. So we'd appreciate that. You can also get involved with us on social media. We are on all Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but Twitter is where we're most active. So check us out there at The Warehouse Pod. You can also email you can email the show at thewarehousepod@gmail.com. So do that as well. And yeah, that's about all we've got. Keep an eye out in the coming weeks for our 100th episode, and then hopefully shortly thereafter, an off-season preview. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, this has been the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Tyler.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Eli.
Thanks for listening.